StoryHinge, Episode 59, Scott Wilhite. Story is the framework.
And we, so often we don't realize how much choice is involved in our lives. But stories really give us the framework for living.
Welcome to StoryHinge, where we unfold more meaning and value in everyone's personal story. At StoryHinge, we explore foundational ideas and beliefs through diverse personal stories in order to discover more meaningful paths, greater happiness, and accelerated growth in one's life. We believe everyone has a beautiful story to grow. Now here's your host, Jason Vidaurri.
Good day today and welcome to StoryHinge. Now today we have on Scott Wilhite. Scott is a commercial film director, filmmaker, and really found himself, following that dream, following that passion, and in a really creative way, and yet found himself at this place in life where he felt like something was missing. And through that process, began a journey to find lasting fulfillment. Now he systematized it, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about his journey in life and stories and the power of stories throughout our lives and really what we can do with our personal story. And without further ado, let's get on with the interview with Scott Wilhite. All right, so excited again here today on StoryHinge. Today we have on Scott Wilhite. Scott, welcome to StoryHinge.
Hey, thanks so much, Jason. Excited to be on with you.
All right, Scott. Well, I know you have some story in your background, and we've touched a little bit on that. And here at StoryHinge, we like to go back in the past a little bit and hear about your story, some of those pivotal moments perhaps in your past that led to where you're at today. And I know one area we're diving more into this season 2 at StoryHinge is looking at story itself. And your background, I look at you and I say, well, that was a professional story maker in his film career. So why don't you take us back a little bit and let us hear a little bit about that?
Okay, thank you. I'm so grateful to be on your show, and I'm grateful that you are doing this, that you are attracting an audience of people who are interested in being story creators. And I love story. I love the power of story. It's everything that I do in my life. I'm a professional commercial filmmaker, so I make commercials, short films, documentaries, things like that, and it's all about story in how we relate to people. Well, kind of an interesting thing that happened in my story is that I was living the dream. It looked like it from the outside. It looked like my life was enviable. I was being able to express myself creatively. I was traveling the world on different assignments. Everything was perfect, right?
Yeah, it sounds like.
But actually inside I was empty. I was frustrated. I was unfulfilled, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I had all this frustration, that my life really didn't matter, that I didn't have purpose. And it was so frustrating. And in fact, it got to the point where I was having these outbursts where, I thought I was keeping all of my emotions inside, and they started eking out, and I started lashing out at coworkers and friends and family. My wife was kind of keeping her distance. My kids were walking around on eggshells. And really, my life was unraveling because I was so frustrated with my life, and I thought I was doing it right. I thought I was, following the American dream. I was checking the boxes. I was doing what I was told would make me successful and therefore happy. Well, it turns out success is not, the worldly success is not happiness. It's not fulfillment.
Well, that sounds interesting. Let me back you up a little bit there because, I kind of followed the traditional path myself and went to college. I'm a chemical engineer. Been working in the industry for, over 17, 18 years now, and found, it's been pretty enjoyable for me, but maybe not as fulfilling as I perhaps hoped or wanted it to be. And so maybe that's why I'm doing this little side hustle and doing a podcast now, is to explore different parts of myself. But I look at you and I say, well, this guy, it sounds like he went more for a passion, a creative area in filmmaking. And that seems like that's sometimes some of those areas we hold back from and say, well, maybe that's not practical enough. I'll go to a more traditional career, something a little more secure perhaps. But tell me a little bit how you got into that and and then we'll come back to where you're at, talking about how things just don't seem quite all together.
Oh, you bet. You bet. And actually, this ties in with my story as far as, my life unraveling. But when I was 8 years old, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And it really was a fortunate and also an unfortunate thing that happened to me. I remember it was 1978. I was sitting on our green couch because, of course, in the 70s, we had this green couch.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And I remember watching TV, and this commercial came on, and it was about this little kid who was about my age, and he was talking to his dad in his dad's home office, and he was saying, "Dad, aren't we going camping today?" And his dad remembers, and he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot." And he's punching away at his 10 keys like some accountant or something, and he's like, "Oh, I've got so much work, I can't get away." And the boy leans on his dad's shoulder and says, "Oh, that's okay. I understand. But do you mind coming out and checking and seeing what I did to the camper?" And the dad's punching away at the 10 key. "Yeah, sure." He finally pulls himself away, and he's in the back of the camper, the dad is, and he's looking around, and he's going, "Wow, you've done a great job in here, son." And the boy goes, "Thanks, Dad," and slams the door. And the next shot, you see them driving away. He's kidnapped his dad for this great weekend getaway. And
That's good.
as this 8-year-old kid whose dad worked all the time, I was like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want to do. So I ran downstairs, and my dad had a home office there. He worked in the basement. He was an architect. And I'm standing there, and I'm just kind of giggling to myself, just imagining me kidnapping my dad. And I'm looking through the hole. See, my dad never finished the basement, so we didn't even have doorknobs, And so there's this huge circular hole. Of course, holes are circular. And I'm looking through, and I'm looking at my dad, and he's behind his drafting table, and he's working there. And I'm just kind of giggling to myself, imagining me kidnapping my dad. And then I realized that real life is not like TV. And I see my dad, and he doesn't look like the dad on TV, and he's got his head in his hands, and he looks tired, and he looks frustrated, and he looks worn out. And I kind of stand up, and I think to myself, and I realize, oh my gosh, my dad's working because he has to, not because he wants to. And I look around in this unfinished basement, and it's mostly like studded walls and a little bit of drywall, and I'm standing on concrete. Nothing's been finished in the basement. My dad just has, a little office he's created for himself there. And all of a sudden, I have this thought come over me that says, "Scott, you are so selfish. You would jeopardize our family's safety for you to have this getaway with your dad." And I felt awful. I had no idea what to do with these feelings. I just felt like I was so worthless. I was just this horrible human being to risk our family's safety. And I went back upstairs just feeling awful about myself. And as I looked at the TV was still on, I remembered that commercial. And then I decided I was going to do exactly what that commercial, I was going to make movies and commercials and things like that to help other kids, to help other families. And I was going to earn my way out of guilt and shame. And I was going to earn my value in the world. And I was going to be somebody important. And I was going to get rid of all these awful feelings that I felt about myself by going into the advertising world and creating that. So I'm 8 years old. I know exactly what I want to do, except that if you listen carefully to my story, it is founded on bad math. I'm thinking if I work hard and I'm successful and I create films that help other people, then I will somehow be worthwhile. I will somehow be somebody of worth and of value, and I will earn my way out of guilt and shame. So when you fast forward, I go into college. I knew exactly what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an advertising copywriter. Ended up doing that for a number of years. Just kind of fell into directing and producing commercials and films. And I'm living the dream, in air quotes there, because I'm doing exactly what I set out to do. But because my math was founded on just a bad formula, that somehow I wasn't somebody of value, that I had to earn it, and that there was, a way to earn, your way out of guilt and shame. That's when I started to feel this disconnect with, I wasn't happy, and I was frustrated, and I was angry because I was not satisfied. I was doing what I thought would make me happy, and instead it just revealed how empty and unfulfilled I was. Does that make sense to you, Jason?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah. I think a lot of us get into that trap of this concept of, if I do this, or if this comes to me, then I'll be happy.
Totally.
It's always down the road. It's always something coming. When that raise comes, when that new job comes, when I find that special someone.
Yeah.
It's this constant story that talking about story that we seem to tell ourselves, and we seem to build up from our youth. I guess in your youth, I guess, where did some of that, do you have any ideas where some of that foundation came from in terms of this concept of having to earn it, or it's coming down the road? Were those teachings, or those you just picked up from society? Do you have any idea where that came from?
Well, I really think it came from that experience of feeling guilt and shame that, here I was in this unfinished basement. My dad didn't have a weekly paycheck, because it was project to project. And sometimes those clients didn't pay, or they didn't pay for a long time, and he would have to hound his clients to get paid. And so money was always scarce, and so I had all of these stories told to me of scarcity, and things like that just really, became a part of me. It was never anything intentional that my parents set out to say, we're going to give him a limiting mindset, or build scarcity into it. It was just things that I picked up. But I remember from that moment of feeling guilty that I, felt so selfish that, I would jeopardize the family safety. But when I look back and I see this innocent little 8-year-old boy who all he wants to do is spend time with his dad. I mean, it's all these great noble things, but because I had taken them in a negative and I had wrapped this story around it, that somehow made me worthless and selfish and mean and all these other things, that became a part of this story that I told myself over and over and over again. And I couldn't earn my way out of it because it was a story that just, it was founded wrong. So anyway, then I'm in my 40s, and I'm struggling because I'm doing everything I thought I was supposed to do. I intended to create these kinds of films and commercials, and that's what I'm doing. And yet I feel empty inside. And I remember thinking, maybe I just need more. Maybe I have so much guilt and shame that I can't just help hundreds of people or thousands of people. Maybe I need to do something so big and so grand that I am helping millions of people, and that is somehow going to earn me out of guilt and shame. I think it's the same kind of, rabbit or squirrel cage, or, invisible merry-go-round that we get stuck in, that we think if we have more money, or if we have more of this, or, or whatever, then we will somehow be satisfied. Yeah. And I was just caught in that, and it was getting me nowhere. And the harder I worked, the less energy I had, the more frustrated I became, the more tangled up in it I was. And I couldn't find my way out until just the wheels fell off. And I was fortunate enough to find out that it was about my belief system. It was about the stories I was telling myself, and it was about my focus that was causing me such grief and anguish. And once I was able to clear that stuff up, oh my gosh, suddenly I was no longer the victim of my story. I was no longer the victim of my circumstances. I had control, I had influence, and although I've had rough and rocky times since then, I have never gone back to that feeling of desperation and of feeling stuck and feeling trapped, and that there wasn't anything I could do. And I am just so grateful that the wheels fell off, and grateful that somebody was kind enough to point out to me the science behind a lot of the new thinking that's out today. So
okay, great. And as you're going through that, and not having that satisfaction, still looking for that reward down the road, I mean, was there a certain incident that happened, or was that a gradual realization? How did you kind of come out of that, as you're talking about that? How do you come out of that and start charting a new path?
Well, for me, the wheels fell off. I started lashing out at other employees, and finally, uh, the company that I worked for, I thought I was this great employee, and I thought I was all wonderful, and I had won all these awards for them, and I was their most productive guy, and I'm thinking I'm fantastic, and they're going, boy, this guy's a pain in the keister, because I was so volatile. And finally, they were putting me on probation, and I realized, something's got to change. And I recognized the damage I'm doing to my family, and I'm seeing all my frustration, and I don't know what to do. And finally, the wheels just totally fell off, and I was fortunate enough to run into a guy who was reading a book on the science of happiness. And it's the research in positive psychology, if you've heard about that. It's new emerging research from Harvard and Stanford and UCal Berkeley and the University of Pennsylvania. And they are studying what makes people flourish. Rather than, traditional psychology where they look at you and they figure out what's wrong with you. With positive psychology, they look at you and they go, what are your strengths? What's going right? And how can we capitalize on that? And basically, when I learned about this stuff, I realized that there were things I could do right now. There were, I could change my focus. I could change my story, my inner story, and I could work my way out of this fixation of things that were out of my reach or that I, felt were missing in my life, and suddenly start to enjoy what I already had, because it really is an inner job in finding and discovering happiness and your purpose of life and all these things. So that was the moment for me, was just totally having the wheels fall off and being fortunate enough to have somebody point out that there's another way, and it's actually simpler than I thought. It was totally within my reach.
Okay, that's great. I want to jump into this other way. One thing that was crossing my mind as you're saying that is this concept of the inner story we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
You shared a good part about you're 8 years old, and there's just, you kind of accepted this story that there's, at that age, you just don't have those filters to know, am I telling myself a good story or not, or do I reject this? And you can see how that story carried with you for many, many years before you started questioning it.
Oh, I still tell myself stories, and I have to catch myself and go, oh my gosh, what am I doing?
And that's just fascinating to me that we have that. And then I think even probably more, so a lot of us never question those stories. We just accept them and say, yeah, this is how I am, or this is how I think. This is my life. I guess maybe one thing that you've learned through this is what can we do with that inner story?
Well, the awesome thing is once you recognize that you're telling yourself a story, there are things that you can do to change it. And suddenly you take back control. You're no longer being, the victim of your story. I work with a lot of people, and I am surprised how many people think they are uncreative. And yet I'm looking at them going, oh my gosh, you are so incredibly creative. Look at the story you've just invented. I've got this fantastic accountant, and he can tell me all the things that are going to go wrong with how I've structured my business or whatever, and he can invent these amazing, terrible, horrible stories that can happen if I continue down this road, and lawyers are the same way. But often they will come to me and they'll go, Scott, wow, you're so creative. And I'm thinking, no, look at you. You are inventing these stories, and and so many of them have these horrible, terrible endings that could maybe possibly happen, but most likely won't. But then you invest all this time and this energy, and it just zaps you of your strength as you go forward with this. But anyway, yeah, so I recognize now when I'm telling myself a story and when other people are, and try to point that out. Like for instance, I did a series of films, short film kinds of things, promotions for this guy who had climbed to the top of the tallest peaks on all 7 continents. So he's a 7 summiter, and he's really cool. And as I'm finishing up his little films, I'm reaching out to him and I'm asking him for a clarification, or I'm asking him for a graphic or this or that. And he is so responsive. I get an email back within 20 minutes all the time. And then I finish the little pieces and I post them online and I send him the links to it. And then nothing, just crickets. And I start immediately telling myself a story. And I'm thinking, oh, he hates them so bad that he's trying to find a polite way to tell me, oh, Scott, these are terrible, or like whatever. I start creating these horrible ending stories that are all negative. But because I'd been working on this stuff for so long, I recognized I was telling myself a story, and I had to just kind of disconnect from that story and say, I don't really know what's going on, and allow the story to play out. So it was like 3 days later, I finally get an email back from him, and it says, Scott, I'm in Nepal. Can't wait to see him. The internet's terrible out here.
Yeah.
And I realized I could have spent 3 days working myself up over this story that I've invented for myself of him hating it and not knowing how to respond. And just think about all the stress and all the anxiety that would have been, just eating away at me physically, emotionally, if I had allowed myself to perpetuate that story and work it over and over and over in my mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that. No, that's a good point. And I think just having that awareness and catching ourselves when we're starting to go down those stories, and it's it's very easy for us to be on the negative side too. As humans, that's our default, to go negative and to see the threats, to see the fears first, before on the positive side, perhaps.
Yeah, they say it's easy to think downhill or think negatively because you're thinking downhill.
Yeah,
and gravity just takes you down.
So as you started, discovering this about yourself, why don't you take us down that path and what you did with that and what leading up to where you're at today?
Yeah. Okay. So once I learned about the science of happiness, once I started getting into that and realizing that, oh my gosh, there are things I can do right now to change what's going on in my life, to no longer be the victim. And I tell people that my life was changed forever temporarily because it didn't take me long to start drifting back into my old ways of thinking. I would read all of these science books and I would learn about the science of happiness and all of the great research that's coming out, but I wasn't able to put it into practice on a daily basis, when I was actually out working and doing things. And so that's when I realized that happiness really is a skill. It's a skill I wasn't very good at, but with any skill, through repetition, through consistency and intensity, you can get better at it. And I could get better at it quickly. And so that's when I really started changing my focus from just letting life happen and just rolling with it to being deliberate about the thoughts that I allow to, ruminate in my mind, to the programming that I, allow to come through, to my morning routine, being very deliberate and focused about what I do in the morning so that I set my intentions, so that I do different things to be in charge rather than be reactive, if that makes sense to you. I used to do what most people do, I think, is the first thing they do is they wake up and they look at their smartphone, or they're checking Twitter, or they're checking Facebook or email, and immediately you start being reactive to what's going on rather than being deliberate and intentional. And it was when I started doing that stuff that all of a sudden I started to regain control over my story and create it and craft it and turn it into, the kind of life that I really want to lead.
And I guess, how long have you been on this shift, I guess?
It's been about 3.5 years now.
Okay.
And
so not too long, but long enough to see some results.
Yeah. And it's been frustrating because it's been up and down and up and down. And lately I'm getting a lot more momentum, which is really cool because I'm finding that there are different things that I can do. And the things that I'm finding right now is my morning routine is absolutely vital. And that's new to me. I've only been doing that for the last, I guess 3 months. And now all of a sudden I'm getting lots of momentum that I didn't have before. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, how can I change my life? What are some things I could do to stop being frustrated or stop living reactively or being so angry and lashing out at people? Getting an effective morning routine where you are very deliberate and intentional about how you start out can totally change your life.
That's good. Now I understand it that through this you talking about happiness as a skill, that there's 7 skills that you've laid out. I think both in a book and also in some of the work that you do. Mm-hmm. You think it's worthwhile to hit those 7 at least briefly, and so people have an idea of what are these 7 skills to be happy? I don't get this guy if they're thinking that.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'll explain a little bit about that. So when I had this temporary change, I found out that happiness really was more of a skill, and that there are certain things that, and what it was these scientists would put people into these experiments where they would influence them, by having them do different activities. And it was amazing if you can elevate different character traits within you, then suddenly, you started to feel elevated levels of happiness, of life satisfaction, and things of that nature. And so I realized it was a skill, and it was a skill I wasn't very good at. So I started, in all of my research, I started pulling in, kind of common themes that would come up over and over again. And through that, I identified kind of 7 major skills. And within each of these skills, of course, there are lots of sub-skills. But if you have these, you basically have the foundation for living deliberately and intentionally and not being reactive in what's going on around you. So I'll share just a few of those with you, and hopefully they'll make sense to you. But as I do that, can I give just like one little caution kind of thing?
Yeah, sure.
And I'll tell a story with it. So the caution is, as I tell you this, you may listen and go, that just sounds too simple, too easy, and you can dismiss it. And I totally get that, because I'm with you. When I first heard about this, if I wasn't so desperate, I never would have tried it. But I was absolutely at the end of my rope, and so I put it into practice, and that's when my life started to change. And there's this story back in the Bible, the Old Testament. There's this guy named Naaman, and he was a powerful guy. He had money. He had position. I think he was in charge of a military group or something. But he also had leprosy, and he really didn't want that. And he had a servant that told him, hey, if you go to Israel, there's this man of God who can help you. And so he's excited to do that. He leaves, and he goes to find this guy. I think his name's Elijah or Elisha. I get them mixed up. Yeah. But he goes to Elijah. He's so excited about this, and Elijah's servant meets him at the door and tells him to go and wash 7 times in the River Jordan. Well, Naaman hears this, and he's just furious. And he goes away just absolutely upset. And I don't know if it was because he felt, jilted, that he had expectations of meeting this man of God, or that if he just felt that it was too simple, too easy. And his servant, as they were going away, his servant said, if he had asked you to do a great thing, wouldn't you have done it? And, fortunately in his story, he actually goes back and he does it, and he washes himself, and his skin returns to normal. But as I tell you these skills, they may sound just like that. They may sound so simple, so easy, and so dismissive that, there's no way that can make a difference. Mm-hmm. So I'll share just a few of the skills. So the first skill is the skill of gratitude. And this comes up, you can Google it, you can research it, but in like just about every bit of research that comes out now on people who live happy, who are resilient, who are strong, gratitude just comes to the top of the list. And there are things that you can do to boost your gratitude levels. And the thing that changed for me was, I remember, and it was these 10 words, and it was this researcher, that I was reading, and he or she, I can't remember who it was, said, "You can't be grateful and unhappy at the same time." And I thought, oh my gosh, that's it. That's the secret right now. If I can't be grateful and unhappy at the same time, then if I boost my gratitude levels, then I can be happy. And I started to apply some of the principles that they had. And like a very simple thing that you can do is you can keep a gratitude journal every day. I tell people to write down 3 fortunate things that happened to you today. And I tell them to commit to not go to sleep until they have written down those 3 things. Go and grab yourself a journal. Get a notebook. You can, run to Walmart and get one for $5. But you can change your life by starting to look for these repeated patterns of finding or remembering or recognizing 3 fortunate things that happen to you each day. And just a quick story. When I first started doing this, again, I heard about the research. I read all this stuff, and I didn't believe it, and so I didn't apply it. I told myself, okay, I'm just going to think more grateful thoughts through the day, or I'm just going to make my prayers more grateful at night or whatever. And 2 weeks later, nothing had changed in my life because I hadn't changed. And I realized that I had not really applied it. And so I started to do what I said, write down each night 3 fortunate things that happened to me. And for the first week, nothing. It was exactly what I anticipated. No change in my life whatsoever. And then about a week later, I was so tired. I was dragging myself up to bed, and I was cranky as all get out because I'd had a horrible day. And then I remembered I had not written in my gratitude journal, and I was angry and I was frustrated, and I couldn't think of one good thing, let alone 3 fortunate things that happened to me that day. And I don't know if I even wrote anything down, but I remember the next day thinking, okay, I'm not going to wait till the end of the day. I'm not going to have that happen again. I'm going to look for it. And so as I live up in the mountains above Sundance, and there's this little, canyon road that I'd drive down. And if you got behind someone that was going slow, you were behind them forever. And I remember this next day that I was driving and I was coming up on this guy and he was going slow, and I started to lose my cool. I could feel my blood boiling. And just as I started to lose it, I noticed he pulled over to the side of the road. I passed him, and then he pulled right back onto the road. He deliberately moved over so that I could get by. And I thought, well, that was fortunate. I'm going to write about that tonight. And as soon as I thought that, all of a sudden I started to feel these emotions that I hadn't felt in forever. I felt grateful. I felt happy. I was connected to somebody who had just shown me deliberate kindness. And all of a sudden I realized it was true. If I can elevate, if you can elevate, if anyone elevates their gratitude levels, they will also elevate their happiness levels. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and I'm sure just about all of us have heard that. To be grateful, to have even gratitude journals I've heard about multiple times. I can't say I have an explicit one that is just for gratitude. And I think I'm getting to that point. I think I need it because I just had George and Benta on, who runs the Gratitude Podcast, and I think that's how we got connected.
Oh, he's awesome.
And he encouraged that as well, doing a gratitude journal as one of the things. And one surprising thing about gratitude I learned from him is that you can do it in different ways. You kind of think there's a standard way you think about these things you're grateful for. He said that he's been surprised on how many different ways that people practice gratitude. And I was like, oh, that's a good point. I guess it doesn't have to be a set way. There's all kinds of ways we can do that. So that's beautiful. How about, as I'm listening to different parts of your story, I guess one thing that comes to my mind is this question of what you learned in your professional career as far as stories and how that works, and how this inner story that we've been talking about and relating to happiness. Is there a connection there that you've seen, or do they relate, or?
Oh, totally. It's all about story. I love movies. I love to watch them. And when you watch these stories, it's really all about choice. If you look at the story structure, if you get into, and I'm thinking that your listeners are mostly story creators, and so they know about the kind of the formulas, the path that you have your your protagonist. And, as you're building all of this, there's kind of a set way to do that, but it is so based on choice. And we, so often we don't realize how much choice is involved in our lives. But stories really give us the framework for living. So if you look at a movie and in the first few minutes, something will happen that will throw that person's life out of balance, and then they go off on this quest or this journey to restore balance to their lives. And as they're doing that, they're making choice after choice after choice in order to gain that peace and that balance. Well, that's the same with us. These stories will kind of they teach us how to live, and that's what's happening all the time in our lives, is we're telling ourselves these stories. Well, what can you do to deliberately use your storytelling skills to recognize when you're telling yourself a bad story, when you're telling yourself a limiting belief story, that you can't do something, or that you're stuck, or that you're trapped. Then you can start to take back control of these stories, and rather than being influenced just because, just letting them play out, you're actually crafting them. You're actually creating them in your lives. So I told you that one story about my friend, the Seven Summiter. And so that's just kind of an example of where I find myself telling myself stories that are not productive, they're not constructive to my life. And so when I recognize I'm telling myself a bad ending story, I will often tell myself another story to kind of counteract it, so that it kind of cancels it out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I like
so that I recognize, I'm telling myself a story. And generally what I do is I like to go on the just, have the pendulum swing to the other side, and not just tell myself a positive story. Oh yeah, my friend, didn't respond to my email because he loves it so much. He's trying to find more money to give to me to say thank you. I mean, whatever. My subconscious mind is going to go, yeah, that's a load of tripe, But instead, what I will do is I will invent a crazy story, that involves stormtroopers or trolls or, one of my favorite actors or something like that, just to be inventive and to make myself laugh and go, okay, yeah, I was telling myself a story. So I can either tell myself, an irresponsible story of, that I've just created like this, or I can tell myself a negative story that's going to hold me back. Either way, if I can recognize I'm telling stories and then disconnect from that and allow the story to just play out, then I can get rid of the stress that comes from not living in the present, but worrying about this future, might, could, maybe, possibly happen kind of ending to it. Hopefully that makes sense to you. But
yeah, and that's good. That's good. Like, a lot of that, what you're talking about, or what I hear at least, is that, being intentful about these stories that are coming in out of our lives, be intentful about what, where we're at, being mindful in the moment, so that we recognize that, hey, I'm telling myself this story, or I'm just feeding into a story that's I've been telling myself, and you start questioning those things and being proactive about changing all that. How do you get into that habit of I guess having that awareness and that being proactive in that area? Or what techniques or things have you found that helped you?
Well, there are three things that I think are vital, and it's the same thing with physical fitness and physical health. It's just like going to the gym. And if you think about, you go to the gym and you do a couple of sit-ups or, a few push-ups, it's not going to do that much for you. Yeah. But if you do it every single day, even if you're only doing like 10, if you do 10 push-ups every single day, suddenly it's going to, well, not suddenly, but over time, it's going to get you somewhere. Yeah. Well, that's what you need to do with your mindset, with your belief system, is that you need to have consistency, you need to have repetition, and you need to have intensity. If you add intensity, then you go faster, And so those are the three things that you do. Just like working out at the gym, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. So here's another limiting belief story that I told myself all the time. So one of the things I do is I take take portraits, photos of people. And it was something that I picked up from, some of the cameramen that I worked with. And, they kind of taught me how to use a camera, and they taught me proper lighting. And it was great, that I could use this skill to make some side money. And I remember that I would have, people would email me, and we'd meet in the canyon somewhere, and I would take their family photos. Well, I was always so embarrassed that I could never remember somebody's name. And especially if you put a camera in my hand, I have so many things to think about that trying to remember somebody's name just wasn't going to happen. And so, and it hurt me, because I'm the kind of person, when you get me, when we're really talking, I care about people. I care about, and I want them to know that they're heard, that they're seen, that they're acknowledged. But when I would tell myself I can't remember names, it hurt me to do that. But I remember I'd meet these people, and they'd get out of the car, and I'd say, "Hi, I'm Scott, and you're going to tell me your name, and I'm sorry, I have this brain deficiency, and I'm going to forget your name, and I just apologize for that right now." And I was embarrassed by that, but that was a story I told myself over and over and over again, and it became a self-fulfilling prophecy that I would always forget their name. And then I would just have to say, "Okay, girl number 2, can you move a little to the left?" And I, rather than knowing her name is Stacy or Jennifer or whatever. And it hurt me. And then when I realized, okay, this is a story I've told myself over and over again until I believe it's true and it becomes true. Well, what if I change it? What if I start to say, remembering names is hard for me, but it's something I can do? I mean, just a little shift like that. And I started to do that, and I started to find progress. And then I changed my story a little bit different. I am starting to get really good at people's names. And then I changed it further to where now I believe I can remember people's names. And I can tell you the waiter that that waited on me in LA just, 3 months ago, I still remember his name, but that is not something that I used to have because of the story I told myself. So when we find ourselves with these limiting beliefs, with these, these stories that we're telling ourselves that are not constructive, that are not moving us forward, that are not true to our nature, then if you can start working on those and rephrase them, rewrite them, recraft them to something that's going to move you in the direction that you want, suddenly then you're now in control of your life, and you can move it forward.
I love that. I mentioned, we were talking before we started this interview. One of these themes in my life that seemed to be running all the way to my youth is this concept of our human potential. And so many times I feel like we don't realize who we are.
Yeah.
We don't realize what we can do. And so that's what I love about what you're sharing with us. It's things that are very close to what we have already. We just have to turn things a little bit, build some more habits, be a little more aware. Start, like you said, building some consistency, some repetition around these things and intensity. And then we'll, be able to make some, over time, some drastic changes in our life. You mentioned you've been in this 3.5 years. Can you give us a sense of how things are different for you?
Yeah, actually, what I'm so excited about right now is I'm now getting into purpose of life, and not like in some general term, but like purpose of my life and your life. That each of us, I think, has a specific thing that we're called to do. And as I'm getting into that, and I'm finding that now that my belief system has changed to where I believe I can influence and impact and change my life, now suddenly I can start peeling away layers and discovering who I am. You mentioned about that we've forgotten who we are. Well, I want to rediscover that. I want to explore and get curious and creative about who I am and who I want to be, and that's what I'm playing with right now. And it is so fun and so exciting to discover talents that I never knew I could do. That I never knew I had. And anyway, yeah, it's been a life-changing thing, and I'm starting to get momentum now, which is just so fun.
Okay. And now I want to make sure that if people want to reach out to you, get to know more about your work, what you're doing today, what's the best way to do that?
The best way is to just go to scottwilhite.com, and there'll be links and resources for you. I've created a bunch of things that hopefully will help you. I've got a book if you want. I've created an app called Feed Your Happy, and really soon I'm releasing a purpose planner that will help you be very intentional and deliberate as you start to get curious about who you are and what your identity is, and really start to live as the fullest expression of yourself. So super happy to share what I found. You can find that at scottwilhite.com.
All right. Well, make sure I'll put that links with the podcast and on the website as well. So for all you out there, you can find links for that. Well, before we go here, this has been enlightening. I've got some notes jotted down, things I want to continue to think about this from what you shared. One of these thoughts that you shared is that story is a framework for living, and that kind of stuck with me. That's an interesting concept around story. That's a framework for living. Before we go here, I want to give you a chance to share anything else, and with someone out there kind of looking around, maybe wondering about their own story, wondering what they could do with it. Would you have anything to share with that person? Yeah,
and I'm really excited about this thought of stories give us the framework for living. I actually got that from Robert McKee. If you know him, he wrote a book called Story. He would teach classes. I went to a class he taught in New York City where he teaches the craft of screenwriting and novel writing, and that and kind of the framework that would be used in a story. Well, that always stuck with me, that the stories give us that framework. But I didn't realize that then I could use that to change my own life, to change my own story, to rewrite what I've believed about myself, the limiting things that do not propel my story forward. Well, okay, if stories do give me the framework for living, how can I put purpose and meaning to my challenges? The bad things that have happened to me, how can I put those into context to where there's a purpose for it? And it's like, oh, well, now all of a sudden I can use this to be more the hero of my story rather than this victim who always has all these, bad things set me back. But instead, these are things that are going to propel me forward. And by using, these tools that we have as creators, suddenly, our stories can be these beautiful things. Our lives can be wonderful, and we can live as the best version of yourself. You think about any movie, and the character that starts out in the beginning, and they have all this bad stuff happen to them. And then if you were to take the person that they become at the very end and put them in the situation that they were at in the beginning, there's no way they could go back into their limiting beliefs and their small world that they used to have, because they've grown and they're amazing now. Like, I love the movie Up with Mr. Fredrickson, and he's this old guy who walks around on this little cane with, tennis balls at the bottom. And then towards the end, he's like this superhero guy battling people with that. Well, if you were to take him and put him back into the old situation, he couldn't do that because he's grown so much. Well, that's what we can do with our lives when we realize that we can craft, we can create, we can master our stories and be very inventive on who we want to be.
That's beautiful. Beautiful, Scott. Appreciate that. I'm sure many are going to enjoy this time with you. And I want to thank you for spending time with us here on StoryHinge, and wishing the best for you. And we'll keep in contact.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me on.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, audience, for joining us today, and I want to thank Scott for taking time to be with us. I guess on a note on that is that I know we spent a lot of time talking about Scott and his life and story and the power of our own story. And one thing we did not do is to jump into his filmmaking and talk about story within filmmaking and that creative process. And I've already reached out to Scott, and he's agreed to come back to do another episode, and we'll talk more deeply about filmmaking and story within filmmaking and what that process looks like. And I'm really excited to dig deeper into that. So stay tuned for round number 2 with Scott Wilhite. I guess first, just a few thoughts on the interview. And maybe I'm going to get back to doing a little bit more of Jay's takeaways and some of my thoughts at the end of an interview. But I kind of do that with some caution because I want the interview to stand as it is and for my guests to be able to share their thoughts and their ideas, and that's the purpose of it. But I do want to reflect a little bit and talk about this concept of story being the framework for life. And I really think that story is the framework, or a vessel, if you will, for a lot of things, for ideas and beliefs, for even our values, and a lot of things we might just kind of accept and take as our belief system, or maybe even thoughts about who we are. And I guess what I found as I've looked deeper into that, there's usually a story that's frameworked around that belief system or that idea or that concept that I seem to hold on to. And it's in the examination of that story or the creation of a new story that helps me to, I guess, to move forward or to better see things more clearly. So that was really cool. I've been wanting to give more tools on what do we do with our own personal story. And I liked one of the things that Scott shared, and that we need to have these alternative stories. When we feel ourselves start falling into an old pattern, that old story, start listening to that again or repeating it in our mind, playing it out again, that is valuable and it's powerful to have an alternative story we can change paths with and say, okay, no, wait. No, Jason, this is where I'm going. This is a story that I'm holding on to. You can change, you can do this, or whatever that might be. I think that's powerful as well. I guess also I want to say, one of the things I want to do better in 2018, my second year of podcasting here, is to be a little bit more open with myself and my process and where things are at on the podcast, and to let you know about that. And so, honestly, ending the last several months in 2017 were a little bit tough. Not that I enjoyed having the guests and doing the podcast. It was more of that feeling of needing a new direction, feeling like, well, yeah, that just, something's not complete here. And so I really feel a renewed sense of excitement and joy around the podcast as I'm focusing more into story itself, and to dive into story creators out there, people who are making story, and to learn more about story and its impact and how we can use story better in our lives to make things better, really, to make our own life better and to make help those around us. And so, with that, I'm really excited to have some oral storytellers out there coming on, some written book writers out there coming on, some filmmakers, and other people talking about personal story and what do you do with your personal story. So with that, I invite you to, subscribe to the podcast, share it with others, share it with other people you might think need to have better story in their life. And that's most all of us. But those who are, I think those who are into story and story creation are going to be able to find something here as well. So I invite you to join me on that. And as we start moving here into season 2 at StoryHinge. So with that, best wishes to you. I hope you're having a happy new year, and we will catch you next week. Have a good one.
Thank you for sharing with us at StoryHinge. We hope this time together has added more goodness to your journey. Until next time, onward and upward, and may your own story continue to grow more beautiful.